Okay, let's just dive right into this explainer. If you've walked down any suburban street on a Saturday morning lately, you've probably noticed something kind of weird. Dead silence. No crowds, no shouting auctioneers. Today, we're objectively breaking down the sudden collapse of Australia's iconic weekend auction culture. We're tracking a massive, highly consequential shift here in the 2026 property market. We're talking widespread vendor panic. But more importantly, we're going to map out exactly how these shifting dynamics are creating, honestly, some unprecedented opportunities for those of us who know how to play the game.
Right, so while the mainstream media is still out there pushing this tired narrative about a booming property sector, the raw data is telling a very, very different story. It's actually a pretty devastating reality for sellers right now. National auction clearance rates have officially plummeted well below that critical 50% threshold. And look, this isn't just a one-off weekend blip, right? This trend has held firmly for 3 consecutive weeks. I mean, when more than half of the properties going under the hammer are just failing to sell, yeah, you've got a structural market shift happening right in front of you.
Section 1. Crashing clearance rate data. Let's look at the hard numbers and see how this builds a really stark picture of our current economic reality.
To really grasp the sheer scale of this collapse, we've got to look at the major capital cities. The traditional engines of Australian real estate. And wow, the drop across these historically bulletproof hubs is just staggering. Sydney's weekend clearance rate is sitting at a brutal 46%. That leaves the vast majority of sellers completely stranded. But the real shocker here? Brisbane. Brisbane has completely collapsed to an unbelievable 23%. Just put yourself in the shoes of a Queensland seller right now. Nearly 80% of auctions are failing. The very foundation of that market has fundamentally fractured.
It's wild because vendors are still going into this expecting the glory days. Aggressive bidding wars, massive crowds spilling out onto the street, intense competition. But the 2026 reality? It's dead silence. It's empty front lawns and absolutely zero registered buyers. Just picture it. An auctioneer holding a gavel midair, desperately scanning an empty suburban yard while the neighbors awkwardly peek through their curtains. That is the new weekend reality for a rapidly growing number of Australian properties.
Section 2. Targeting stressed property listings. This sudden retreat of competitive bidding officially marks the death of the seller's market.
And that death is triggering widespread vendor panic. But hey, for savvy, data-driven buyers, this panic? It's exactly what we want. It represents the absolute best buying window we've seen since the pandemic. Now, to target these listings, you need to understand their secret weakness. It's something called public failure stigma. See, vendors aren't just stressed about the money. They are literally terrified of public embarrassment. They dread that permanent, highly visible mark of a failed campaign. And because of that intense fear, their emotional leverage completely evaporates before the hammer even falls.
Because of this panic, real estate agents are absolutely scrambling behind the scenes. They're actually advising clients to bail on auctions altogether. In fact, scheduled auctions have dropped by a massive 15% in just this past week alone. Agents are quietly, but urgently, begging their clients to pull their listings from the public stage and switch over to private treaties. Sellers are effectively fleeing the open market.
Section 3. Tactical negotiation strategies. Let's get into the actual execution playbook.
So how do we, as mathematically disciplined buyers, actually capitalize on this? Well, we leave emotion completely at the door. We rely on a strict execution playbook to navigate this unprecedented window and secure a premium asset for, frankly, a fraction of its peak value. It maps out exactly like this. First, actively track vulnerable properties, specifically listings languishing for over 45 days with an upcoming auction. Then, we move into a highly structured 48-hour pre-auction phase. And if they don't bite, we hit them with a strict post-auction deadline.
Let's break down that primary pre-auction play. It is ruthless, but it's perfectly timed. Step 1, like we said, identify those 45-day-plus listings. Step 2, you instruct your buyer's agent to present a fully unconditional offer exactly 48 hours before the event. And step 3, and this is absolutely crucial because the math demands it, you demand a strict 10% discount on the property.
Now you might be wondering, why on earth would a seller ever accept a 10% haircut? Well, it's simple. You are handing them a clean, hassle-free exit from public failure. You're basically balancing their intense fear of embarrassment against a slightly lower price. When their only other option is standing in front of crickets on a Saturday morning, your lowball offer suddenly looks like an absolute lifeline. You're capitalizing entirely on their evaporating leverage. But, okay, let's say they hold out. The property goes to auction, and, as the stats heavily suggest, it inevitably passes in. The source material is crystal clear on the very next move. Buyers must immediately strip control away from the real estate agent. You absolutely cannot let the agent control the post-auction narrative and start working the phones to drum up phantom competition. No way.
Your required tactic here has to be swift and totally decisive. You swoop in immediately following that failed auction with a time-sensitive, low-ball written offer. And this is the kicker. You enforce a strict, non-negotiable expiry for exactly 5 p.m. on Monday afternoon. You put a ticking clock right there on the table. This forces a panicking vendor to make a logical decision before the reality of their failed campaign has even fully set in.
Look, mastering these shifting dynamics is absolutely your key to securing a premium asset in 2026. The era of blind bidding, overpaying for Australian real estate, it's officially dead. The math simply dictates that paying peak prices is a thing of the past. Moving forward, only the mathematically disciplined, the ones who invest with pure logic and completely tune out the old media narratives, are going to thrive.
Which brings us to our final thought for you to take away from this explainer. You've got the raw clearance data, you understand the psychology behind the public failure stigma, and you have the precise tactical negotiation playbook in your hands. But having the data and actually pulling the trigger are two entirely different things. So, armed with all this information, are you brave enough to lowball a panicking vendor in this market? Let that sink in, and we'll catch you in the next explainer.